Good morning. I am so excited to lead this discussion with this panel as we talk about transforming the government through data-driven intelligence and through technologies such as the cloud. How's the sound? In and out? I have hair that's covering the microphone. So I want to talk about the space that we're in as well. I don't know if you guys have realized, but what I love about the space we're in today is it's really creative. Hopefully it's inspired you to think differently. We like to do design thinking in space like this with our customers, primarily because it allows you to get outside of your four walls, get away from those traditional constraints that you might have in your offices. Feel free to think differently, come up with ideas. There's no bad ideas. Kind of be fearless and be creative. So that's a big component when we talked about design thinking earlier today, as a way to kind of help transform your agencies through reimagining those business processes. I think the other huge component and a lot of our conversation today has been around leveraging data to drive that transformation as well, which is why I'm excited to, and I want to introduce our panelists. We've got two very experienced leaders who have been transforming their government agencies. It's not working. Is this better?
I don't think it's on.
Is it not on? Is it on now? I'm not going to start from the beginning. Hopefully the front row heard what I said at least. So I'm excited anyway to announce and have our panelists introduce themselves. They've both been doing amazing work throughout their career in their agencies to really drive transformation through data, through their experience with business intelligence, data transformation, exposing ways to become more efficient within their agencies. So I'm going to turn it over and have them introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about your background and your career. We'll start with Nancy.
Okay, thank you. People, when they meet me and they say, what do you do? And I say, I'm the chief statistician of the United States. They go, wow, that's a really cool title. That's one of the best titles in government. And then they pause for a minute and they say, but what do you do? Because nobody really quite understands that job. I've been the chief statistician for a little over a year at OMB. My job is really all about data quality and integrity and objectivity. So if you hear me say a lot today about we're not thinking enough about the quality of the data that we're using, we're just trying to get our hands on as much of it as we can, you'll know why. Prior to being the chief statistician, I was the chief operating officer and the deputy director at the U.S. Census Bureau. And I was there working for 2 decennial censuses in addition to all the other things that the Census Bureau does. So I know a lot about scaling up and cybersecurity and doing things on a very large scale. I also worked in the private sector at a social science research company as a data user and a collector. And I also worked for a small startup company here in the DC area that was a business analytics firm. So I have a long career in the federal government. So I've been in and out of the federal government. I've worked in all 3 branches of government. So, and data has always been kind of central to what I've been doing.
Chris?
Good morning, Chris Raleigh. Can you guys hear me in the back? My hair is not blocking the mic or anything. I've been in the federal government for about 16 years and have spent most of my career doing some type of data or data-related projects, although, the beginning of my career really wasn't called that. At GSA, as the chief data officer, I report to the chief information officer. But I spend probably about 10% of my time on technology-related issues and most of my time on cultural and governance-related issues. So I do a lot of literacy for a governance group at the very senior level within the agency on What data do we have? How do we do data to drive decisions? Do I need the mic?
Yeah.
Okay. How do we do data to drive decisions across the agency from an internal perspective? How do we maximize our data assets? And then how do we encourage the data practitioners across the agency to come together to centralize on common platforms and tools to do their work? I both work at the very intermediate practitioner level as well as government and priorities at the very senior level.
So Chris, tell us about the data strategy that you're working on for GSA and the move to the cloud to kind of facilitate that transformation within the agency.
Yeah, so I'll kind of tell you a little story, and this will, for those of you in government, this will sound very familiar. You have independent applications that are stood up across the agency, some very old, some very new. You have a director or senior level person who would like to get report or information X out of said system. They pull it out. It goes up the chain or laterally across the organization. Then someone says, well, that data would be really good if it would be mashed up with this data in this other system. And somebody really smart does that or sets that up or does it and establishes an Access database or maybe launches a SQL server. They continue to build on that code and produce more and more analysis. And all of a sudden you have a mini data warehouse or data environment, and you start to have tens of those, dozens of those, and agencies, the longer you've been around, the more of those environments you have, the more data feeds you have going in multiple directions. And now you're trying to say, well, it would be far more efficient if we would do this work centrally and in the cloud. How would we migrate all of these capabilities without breaking any of these interactions? And the strategy we're taking on that is encourage a better environment with better performance, with better tools. And if you go at it, our strategy is if you go at it from you have to stop doing what you're doing over here and do it over here, or we're going to attempt to migrate all of this legacy code work and replace it over here, we just felt that was a non-starter. So our approach is to stand up a cloud data environment where applications can feed data into this environment that is disconnected from the analytical tools that are also in the environment, that is disconnected but loosely connected to some of the visualization tools, to the data sharing capabilities. So we're coming at this from not necessarily a compliance angle of here's how we're going to migrate all of our legacy capabilities into the cloud, instead of here is an environment we're standing up incrementally and articulating the value of that capability. So that's sort of from the technology and data storage standpoint our driver.
So kind of easing them into the comfort
Yes.
of using the cloud in a more hybrid approach.
Yeah, and then really establishing governance and literacy at very senior levels to what that means, and how we do that in a way that increases our security posture and increases our data quality posture.
As we heard from one of our speakers earlier today on unleashing the data in a trusted fashion is so critical. So Nancy, I love your new title. I think it's great. And this is a new role for you, as you mentioned. So tell us about the strategy and the thought leadership that you're providing for your agency as well as government as a whole.
Okay. Yeah, there's a couple of areas that we've really identified as priorities. One, maybe which we'll talk about a little bit more, is part of the President's management agenda, and that's putting together a whole federal data strategy. So there is a cross-agency goal, priority goal, they call them CAP goals, to build a federal data strategy. And I'm the co-leader of that along with the federal CIO, Suzette Kent. And we have two agency champions of this, the Department of Commerce, which I think is really appropriate because they have a lot of data, NOAA, PTO, Census Bureau, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and others, and the Small Business Administration, which is great because too often I think the smaller agencies get swept up in things that are appropriate for larger agencies. So we're really trying to put a strategy together that makes sense and can be implemented. All of us who are leading this goal have a lot of hands-on operational experience, and so we're trying not to be sort of pie in the sky, here's your latest OMB guidance, go follow it when you can't. Because a lot of us also have experienced not being able to implement OMB guidance. And so the key thing here is that you really have to think about what are the insights you're trying to gain from the data. And I think what you've heard, and I think, I looked at sort of your agencies and your job titles of who signed up for this. It's quite varied, but I think it's representative of the constituent community. What problems are you trying to solve? Why do you want the data? There's an unlimited amount of data available now. Open data, restricted data, all kinds of data. You can get swamped in it. You can get lost in some of these technical issues, but you have to start with what are you really trying to do? So I think what you heard is some people are trying to improve their own operations with real-time data to improve their mission. Others are really kind of in more of a compliance audit oversight function, and they want some machine learning and some artificial intelligence that helps them find anomalies and do that job better, which is equally important. Others are really looking at more program evaluation. How well are these programs working? Are we investing money, scarce federal dollars, in the right places to achieve the outcomes in society? And I think people have struggled sort of with measuring performance, but data really allows you now to look at those outcomes. So again, I think you'll hear this over and over again. We have to look at governance. We have to look at data quality. We have to look at breaking down the technology silos that restrict access and don't allow data to be shared easily. And we really have to think about stewardship. One of the things that I think about a lot is protecting privacy and confidentiality. Everybody has to be at the table. This is no longer the domain of the CIO or the CDO or the privacy officer or the head statistician. This is a joint effort. The business line owners have to be there too. And I think that's the tough part, is breaking down the silos and getting people to collaborate.
So I recently read the latest release of the President's Management Agenda, and I love these CAP goals, these cross-agency goals and priorities. And where we've seen success from our customers, as you guys heard some today, was where they could break down these silos. They could work across programs within their agencies, but also outside of their agencies, and really start to collaborate. So I'm very excited about these goals, and I wish you the best success. What are the challenges that you both see kind of, and how do we start to address some of those and kind of move beyond them?
Go ahead.
So I've looked at the federal data strategy and the 4 points there that kind of frame it out as a starting point, which I think nail it right on the head and are great. And I think probably, and Nancy touched on this, the initial part is, okay, we have to assign people in agencies to work on this strategy. We have to assign someone to lead this effort for each agency. And I think some of the default is to fall into a certain title. And I think we really need to fall into functions. Like, these are the functions that need to occur to make this strategy go forward, where agencies can collaborate more. And then figure out how we have a mix of a lot of the titles that Nancy talked about, leading this across different agencies. Because I think if you hone this into one discipline, you're going to miss out on a lot. Because this does include, there's an IT lens, but there's also a cultural lens, there's also a governance lens, there's a collaboration piece, there's a privacy piece, there's a security piece. We got to make sure that we hit all of these and have the right disciplines and expertise to talk about that, so that as the federal data strategy gets more defined, that we are all encompassing without missing any of the parts.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Interestingly, not on my list so much are technical challenges.
I was
because
just thinking that.
No, I have great faith in the development of technologies in the private sector that address these problems, and the advances are rapid. To me, the biggest challenges are cultural and legal and resource problems. Cultural, again, going back to how do we break down the silos and get people thinking differently about how they're going about doing their work. We have many generations right now working side by side in the federal government. And, you know, we have, I mean, when I was a chief operating officer in a big agency, I was so excited by the people coming in who had all these great new ideas, and I watched them hit the wall of, that's not how we do our jobs here. You know, it works. We've been doing this for 20 years. We're going to keep on doing it, so just learn how we do it. And people being so frustrated, and how do you retain that sort of tech-savvy, excited, motivated workforce? How do you stop the war that's going on that I see every day between CIOs, sometimes CDOs if they're not in the CIO shop, the privacy officers, and the data owners, the people who are running the programs who do not want to turn over their IT to the CIOs. I mean, this is a real war that's taking place out there. We have to stop it, folks. We have to find a way to collaborate, because we are never going to get to where we need to be. And I do think moving to the cloud is a really big step in the right direction of, like, you know, take your hands off my server type mentalities that we have. Because it's so responsive, because you can get the security. You still need the governance, but the governance and the thinking about this should be around the data, not around the hardware. Let's get out of that world where we're bogged down in the hardware issues, and, you know, let the cloud providers take care of that. So that to me is cultural. And then legal, I think, is just around data sharing in general. It is, you know, even if you could figure out how to have interoperability, it's like really, really difficult for people, even within the same agency, to start sharing data. These interagency agreements, the MOUs, I think that's a place where OMB can really help to try to standardize that, so that it doesn't take 2 years to get an agreement in place to share data when you need it now.
So happy that you're both not, you know, mentioning any technology as an inhibitor. It's more of an enabler. And you both sound like you're very open to the cloud, and your agencies are doing more work in the cloud. What do you think? What are you seeing from some of your peers? Do you feel that other agencies are becoming more comfortable in the cloud and embracing it? Any thoughts there?
It touches on the same points. It's going to depend agency to agency and the different relationships that are being built. In some agencies that have a historical approach and their mission is based on data, and they've done this type of approach for many, many years, and they have a good relationship with their technology leadership team, you're going to see greater advancements. Organizations that have historically been stovepiped or segmented program by program with independent IT strategies, with independent approval processes, they're going to have more challenges with this approach. So I think it varies. If you know, sort of drew a maturity model of the different components to do this successfully, you're going to get varying degrees. Oh, I have great leadership buy-in, but my technology is terrible, but security is good, and I think it'll just kind of range organization by organization right now.
Yeah, I'd like to see sort of more sharing and standardized approaches to getting federal data on cloud environments. We were just talking a little bit before how it seems like sometimes agencies that have very few resources that they can spare for this are reinventing the wheel on how to move to the cloud, how to take advantage of it. And it really shouldn't be that hard. I've seen agencies really struggling, but, you know, once an agency can get sort of that FedRAMP certified, can get their ATOs, have figured out what the environment is, why should that be so wildly different? You know, I've worked at agencies that have the tightest controls on data. At the Census Bureau, I mean, you would think it was Fort Knox, right? But it's really, really protected because it's collected under an oath of confidentiality. You can go to jail if you reveal people's individual data or businesses' proprietary data and get huge fines. So security is sort of everything. But the Census Bureau is very comfortable putting their stuff on the cloud because it is a secure environment, and you don't have to like swear in everybody who belongs to the cloud provider. There's ways of encrypting your data, of assuring this. But when Census made that move, it was almost like they were starting from scratch, trying to figure out how to do this, and it took forever. And as the COO, I was ready to, just throw up my hands and say, why are you making this so hard? Like, and if every agency has to do that, it's going to be a problem. So more sharing and standardization and standard approaches. And I do think that the cloud providers have a role in sharing that and making it easier for agencies as well.
Yeah, I think there's a ongoing education that cloud service providers that we can do with the customers and help them understand, where we are with our security approaches, what we're doing, and even helping them with the FedRAMP process and understanding all the steps and what their role is in it as well. One of the things, speaking of, we talked a little bit about the President's management agenda earlier, and I love this quote that is in that agenda, that the government must recognize it can no longer meet modern needs with the same approaches, the same technology, and the skill sets as they have in the past. And that addresses a lot of the topics that we're talking about today with the culture and the technology rapidly changing. And I think it's a bit of, what are the lessons learned and what do we not want to do again? So if you guys are open to it, would you share maybe some stories of failures that you've learned from or seen, not necessarily having to be your own, that might help the audience kind of be comfortable and learn from those stories?
Oh, I can talk about my failures all day long. Like, I have a whole lot of them. I would say, as you're going through and you're thinking about standing up a cloud-based data environment or modernizing your technology in some way, and you're looking over here at this giant behemoth legacy world of data reporting, one of my biggest failures was talking about replacing that. And that just became a huge brick wall of people going, well, if you're going to replace that, you're going to have to do these 10,000 things. And I look at the 10,000 and I'm like, well, 5,000 of those are useless. Like, we shouldn't be doing those in the first place. And then it just becomes a huge cultural battle. So the better approach is, hey, I'm starting this new capability, this new approach. I'm not trying to replace what you're doing over here. I'm just saying this is also an option. And I think that, made people more comfortable to buy into that. And now you're starting to see over time people go, well, why am I still doing this when this is like almost real-time information and this is, 2 weeks old? And so, I would say, tread lightly, do no harm. Start with all carrot, all benefit. That would be, kind of a very general thing that I've learned over time.
I like that because our speaker earlier talked about changing culture, and that you can't change culture, you have to create a new one and get people to buy in on it, which is very similar to what you just said. So,
very true.
Nancy.
Yeah, I think, where I've seen failures is where people start out with a very narrow focus that really is kind of right in their wheelhouse, but doesn't take into consideration the whole kind of network of users and participants when it comes to using data. I mean, you really have to identify who are my stakeholders. If you're going to go back right now to work and say, what can I do? I heard all this stuff. I'm really motivated. I'm really inspired. You have to sort of start by mapping your network. Who are the people that need to be my collaborators in this? And in order for them to be collaborators, you have to be thinking, what am I improving? What value are we deriving from this? So it comes down to asking the right questions, identifying the issues, and really sort of collaboratively saying, what problem can we solve together? And then, it's not like, hey, I'm forcing you to a technology, or I'm forcing you to do things that are in my wheelhouse, but you don't see any value in. It's sort of like, how are we going to solve this problem together? And some problems are actually enormous, you know, in the health area, some social problems, other types of things, or even if it's just the people who care about your mission, you know, whether it's law enforcement or defense or whatever it is. And so I think the big mistake is starting out with what you think the solution is before you bring everybody on board to say, can we solve a problem together that we all believe is a big problem, that it's beyond all of us, and none of us individually can tackle it. And then the solutions start to make sense. Well, if we do it this way, it's going to take too long, it's going to cost too much, blah, blah, blah. But if we look, I have this technology over here that can really meet the need, and it's new and it solves the problem, then I think you get a lot more buy-in right from the beginning, because the value is baked into it. And people can see it's going to get them something that they want, not that they're being shoved somewhere that they don't think they want to go.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I would tell you, every customer that we have that is seen success in a short time frame has taken that approach of finding that common cause that they can solve together across agencies or even within their own agency. And everybody has been involved and bought in. So
yeah, one of the things that we're trying to do with putting out a federal data strategy is to identify these kinds of use cases so that we can not only prove out the strategy before we put it out there, but also so that people can see in these different kind of case studies or use cases, oh yeah, that's a lot like the work I do. I can see the value in it. Those guys are really lucky that they sort of got adopted as a pilot project. How can I get that same kind of help to solve my problems? And that's the kind of environment we're trying to create.
Well, we're excited to hear the quick wins and the successes. So we've got a little bit of time. Any other success stories that you want to share that you think is working?
I'm really good at the failures question.
Well, I have a couple of areas that I think are worth addressing where people really were trying to answer questions, and it required a combination of things, but it also highlighted some of the data quality issues that I'm so passionate about. So one of these, and I don't know if it came up earlier, but so the Bureau of Justice Statistics, which is sort of one of the 13 designated statistical agencies that I have under my wing as the chief statistician, was trying to help the Department of Justice figure out information about arrest-related deaths when this question came up. And it was a really big deal because nobody knew how many arrest-related deaths there were around the country. And what had happened was the Bureau of Justice Statistics had been working with these designated representatives at the state level who are supposed to put data into a database. But they weren't really using it, and so quality was a big issue. There was a lot of missing data there and sloppily put in, because when people don't use it and they're just complying, they don't really care. And so they decided we're going to do something a little bit innovative here. And they went out and started doing web scraping for open data, looking at sort of media reports of arrest-related deaths. Well, I think, you know, there's probably a lot of opinions around this room of how accurate some of those stories are and complete. And so what they ended up doing was then taking the web scraped stories and going back and validating them with the local law enforcement agencies and with medical examiners and comparing that to the database that they already had that they were pulling stats from. And it was really quite interesting. And you know, all of the pieces come into play here in terms of data harmonization, trying to bring in data from commercial sources, open sources, from different levels of government, and try to paint a cohesive, unbiased picture. And what they found, I thought, was really interesting, because they found really that there were many, many unreported arrest-related deaths that they were able to validate. And when they went back and they, sort of worked with the people reporting at the state level and say, look at all these validated cases that we found that you're not putting in the database. So that was kind of a feedback loop that helped improve the quality, and it made the information was then available, and you could see it at different levels of geography. So you could see, are there pockets of problems? So now there were some insights in the data. It was higher quality. The sort of bias was out of it from non-reporting. It had been validated. It kind of had the, the oversight of an official statistical agency, and it was actionable. So I would consider, and it was a big effort, but it wasn't, like impossible. It just took some thought and coordination and work to get that done.
No, I think that's a great story, and thanks for sharing it, because that has real impact, right? Mm-hmm. And as you said, but I could sit up here and talk to these guys all day long, but they won't let me. So we are out of time. So I want to thank the panelists. Let's give them a big round of applause.